The last few months felt like one long day, merged into a monotonous routine. Homework, home. Sometimes I joked that my life resembled a scratched record. The office work was predictable, like a bus schedule. Numbers, reports, calls. The evenings were spent in solitude, in front of the screen, where instead of watching movies, I mindlessly scrolled through social media. One day, while coming home under the monotonous sound of rain, I realized I couldn't go on like this anymore. I needed air, emotions, friends. That's when the idea for a picnic came to me. I wrote to Mike, Zach, and Emily in our group chat, "Guys, let's go somewhere? Nature, overnight, just to get away." They replied almost immediately. "Great idea," Mike wrote. "I'm in. I've been wanting to get out into nature." Emily, his girlfriend, added. Zach, as always, brief, just wrote, "When are we going? Preparations." On Saturday morning, I stood at the door of my apartment with a backpack, throwing in everything I might need. A couple of t-shirts, a flashlight, a sleeping bag. I also packed some canned food, a chocolate bar, and a first aid kit. Well, I was almost ready, but at least I wouldn't forget the coffee. My one true weakness. Zach picked me up in his old Toyota. The car was loaded with tents, food, and all the stuff that Mike and Emily must have brought. "Hey Josh, hop in." Mike's grabbing some lemonade, Zach said, turning onto the highway. I sat in the front seat. Mike and Emily, as always, sat in the back. They seemed like the perfect couple. Mike with his lightheartedness and jokes, and Emily, calm and a bit strict. "You look too serious, Josh," Mike said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror. "You sure you need this?" He was right. I had been telling myself that too. On the road. We drove for several hours, the road taking us farther from the city. Thick forests along the highway gave way to fields with rare houses. Occasionally, Zach would turn on the radio, but it quickly went silent as the signal faded. I stared out the window, lost in thought. It seemed like this trip wasn't just an escape from the city noise. It was a chance to feel alive again, to be part of something bigger. Zach, focused on the road, occasionally commented on the scenery. Emily was discussing with Mike how best to grill the meat, while I tried to simply relax. "You're staring at the road like you're trying to hypnotize it," Mike teased. "I'm just enjoying the view," I replied, although my mind was somewhere far away. At the campsite, we reached the forest by midday. The clearing Zach had picked was straight out of a postcard. Tall pines surrounded a spot where we could set up the tents, and not far away, a river flowed. The air was fresh, infused with the scent of pine. "This place is amazing," Emily said, stepping out of the car. Zach nodded. "See, that's why I always plan the trips." We began unloading the car. Zach started setting up the tent while I helped. Mike and Emily went down to the river to check how far we'd need to go for water. Their laughter came from behind the trees. Entertainment. Once everything was ready, we lit a campfire. Emily brought out marinades for the meat, and Mike once again boasted that it was his secret recipe. Zach only smirked, teasing him. "Recipe from a box, Mike?" "No, I added paprika. That makes it exclusive." I sat by the fire watching them. The flames cast warm glows on their faces, and I suddenly felt a twinge of sadness. Their friendship seemed so light, so sincere. I missed that. After dinner, we went for a walk. The forest was dense and shady. The trees stretched high into the sky, their canopies merging, letting in only occasional beams of sunlight. We took a few photos by an old wooden bridge over a stream. "Are you sure you want to keep this shot?" Zach asked, looking at the photo. "Why not? You look good." "That's a rare sight," Mike laughed. By the time we returned to camp, the sun was beginning to set. Zach sat by the fire, turning the coals, while Emily settled into a folding chair with a mug of tea. I felt again that I hadn't made a mistake in suggesting this trip. The first sign. As the shadows grew longer, I noticed something at the edge of the clearing. In the distance, where the dense forest met the setting sky, there was a flicker of movement. I tensed, trying to make it out. At first, it seemed like a deer or a bear, but the figure was too tall and bipedal. It stood perfectly still as though watching us. I blinked, and the next moment, it vanished. "What's with the long face?" Zach asked, noticing my expression. "Ah, nothing. Probably just my imagination," I replied, looking away. But the unease had already settled in my mind. By the time it was dark, we were pretty worn out. The day had been full. We ate, laughed, walked along the river. Mike and Zach even had an impromptu stone-throwing contest, and Emily cheered on her boyfriend so loudly that even the birds in the trees seemed to react. Zach was the first to collapse in his tent. He'd always had a knack for falling asleep anywhere. Mike and Emily sat by the dying fire, quietly chatting, while I got ready for bed. The fire crackled, sending the last sparks into the air. I barely remembered the strange figure I'd seen in the woods. At that moment, in the glow of the fire and surrounded by friends, I felt safe. "All right, guys, time to sleep?" I yawned, zipping up my jacket. "Yeah, we'll be in a minute." "Mike's just finishing his water," Emily nodded. I climbed into my tent, curling up in my sleeping bag. Exhausted and lightly tipsy, my eyes closed on their own. The forest was quiet. Only the occasional sounds of nocturnal birds drifted in. Mike's disappearance. I had almost fallen asleep when I heard a quiet whisper from outside. "Josh, are you awake?" I forced my eyes open. It was Emily. She stood at the entrance to my tent, her voice filled with concern. "What happened?" I asked, crawling out of my tent. "Mike has been gone for a while. He said he'd step behind the bushes, but it's been like 15 minutes. Her voice trembled. I looked around. The fire had almost gone out, and the dim glow of the embers barely illuminated the dark trees around us. Zach was asleep in his tent, snoring. "Are you sure he didn't just get distracted? Maybe he decided to go for a walk." I tried to calm her, but a chill ran through me. And then it hit me, the tall, dark figure at the edge of the clearing. Motionless, watching. I suddenly sobered up. My heart raced in my chest, but I tried to steady myself. "Stay here at camp. I'll go find him," I said, trying to sound confident. Emily nodded, her hands clasped tightly. The search. I grabbed my flashlight and headed in the direction Emily had said Mike had gone. Darkness swallowed me the moment I stepped out of camp. The trees closed in on both sides, and the flashlight only illuminated narrow strips of ground in front of me. "Mike, you here?" I called quietly, trying not to make too much noise. There was no answer, just the wind rustling the branches. The further I walked into the forest, the more I felt like I was being watched. My spine prickled, like some invisible presence was standing just behind me. "Mike," I called again, this time louder. Still nothing. I stopped, listening. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. A thought flashed in my mind. What if it wasn't just my imagination? What if what I saw earlier was real and it was out there now? But I couldn't turn back. Mike could be lost, hurt, or worse. My fear for my friend drowned out the panic. I continued, scanning the bushes and trees around me. The forest was eerily quiet, as if all sounds had disappeared. Even the birds were silent. Suddenly, I heard a rustling ahead. "Mike, is that you?" I called out. Again, no response. I took a few steps forward, feeling a wave of primal fear rise inside me. After hours of wandering, I became more and more disoriented. The forest was becoming familiar, but dangerous, each step echoing dully in my mind. I no longer thought about Mike or what had happened. All I knew was that I needed to find a way out. But instead, I stumbled upon something I never expected. As I passed by a massive tree, I suddenly noticed something that made my blood freeze. It was a barely perceptible angle, just a shadow, but something inside me immediately stirred. I froze, trying to process what I had just seen. It was a creature. It stood, hidden behind a tree, its eyes glowing like bright, glowing pupils fixed directly on me. I could hear its heavy, labored breathing, so loud it felt almost tangible. I stood motionless, about 10 meters away. The creature looked human, but its size was terrifying. It was over 2.5 meters tall, its body covered in thick fur, like some kind of monster from a nightmare. My nerves couldn't handle it. Everything in my head seemed to collapse. In that moment, I felt my heart pounding so hard in my chest that I thought it would burst out. My body froze in terror, but instinct took over. I didn't think. I didn't analyze or try to understand what the creature was. I just ran, not looking back. My legs moved faster than ever before. I didn't know where I was running. I just raced through the forest, stumbling, leaping over roots and rocks. My mind was a blur, filled with nothing but adrenaline and fear. Branches lashed against my face, scratches appeared on my skin, but I felt no pain. My only goal was to get away, to escape, to survive. I heard its breathing behind me, getting closer and closer. The ground beneath me grew soft and sticky, as if the forest was swallowing me whole, blocking any way out. Panic filled my chest, and my mind struggled to focus. I could hear something snapping branches behind me, something huge and heavy following me. Its steps were heavy, but almost silent, like it was gliding over the ground, a shadow. I could feel the wind brushing against me, and every time I looked back, I saw nothing, but the cold that gripped me remained. I kept running, not noticing how my legs were tiring, how my body ached from hitting the ground and being scratched by the branches. My mind refused to process reality. I just kept running, hoping that somehow I would escape. Everything around me merged into a shapeless mass of fear and chaos. At one point, I tripped and fell, and that was the worst of it. I felt the ground hit my body, but I couldn't get up right away. My arms and legs wouldn't obey me. My whole body was paralyzed with panic. I forced myself up with great effort, gasping for breath, my heart almost stopping from fear. I continued running, stumbling, knocking branches out of the way, but all I could feel was fear. The sensation that the creature was getting closer, that it was right behind me, that it was about to catch me. I knew that if I stopped, it would be over. When I finally reached a small clearing, I turned around. The creature was gone, leaving only its heavy, menacing breath echoing in my head. I felt like I was safe, but I couldn't relax. My mind was in chaos. I didn't know how much time had passed, didn't know where I was or what to do. My legs could barely carry me, but I was still running, as if in a dream, through the unfamiliar paths of the forest. Everything was dark, and only the faintest rays of dawn filtered through the dense tree canopy. I wandered the forest all night, not understanding where I was going. My head throbbed, I felt dizzy, and my thoughts were tangled. I tried to find the camp, to find my friends, but everything around me seemed alien, empty, and terrifying. I heard voices, but they were only in my head. The forest gave me no rest, no refuge. With every step, I lost more confidence, and fear became more overwhelming. Then, at the border between a nightmare and reality, I saw something familiar. It was the clearing, the same clearing where I had lost my friends hours earlier. But now it seemed different, empty and dead. I collapsed to my knees, unable to move. My thoughts were shattered, and there was nothing that could comfort me. The creature, the tracks, Mike, Emily. Everything blurred into one unbearable feeling. I had lost them, and I didn't know what to do next. I scanned the entire campsite as if hoping something would change, as if all of this was just a bad dream. I wanted to believe that there was an explanation for everything, but deep down I knew there wasn't. It was all too strange, too implausible. With trembling fingers, I dialed the police, not knowing what to say. My breath was heavy, my voice shaky, but I finally managed to speak. My friends are missing, in the forest. Please, help. The search yielded nothing. The police combed the forest but found no traces. No footprints, no belongings, nothing to suggest my friends had ever been there. The forest seemed to swallow them whole, leaving only an eerie void. But I couldn't shake the certainty that they were out there, somewhere. I couldn't rest until I found them. Months passed, but the nightmares refused to leave me. Each night, I relived that moment, returning to the empty campsite, the sheer terror of realizing what had happened. I would wake up drenched in cold sweat, my chest tight with the lingering echoes of fear. Sometimes I thought I heard voices, faint, almost like whispers carried on the wind. But every time I strained to find their source, I was met with silence. The forest remained a shadow in my mind, hauntingly familiar and endlessly terrifying. I stopped sleeping properly. Each night, my dreams would take me back to the forest. I saw Mike's face, his wide eyes filled with fear, his lips moving as if to speak, but no words came. In some dreams, he was close but unreachable. In others, he vanished, leaving me alone in an endless forest filled with disembodied voices. Their words were incoherent, but their tone was unmistakably pleading, accusing, desperate. Morning brought no reprieve. I woke feeling hollow, as though a piece of me had been left behind in that forest. I tried to move on, to tell myself that it was over, but the weight of the unanswered questions was too great. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't let this go, couldn't let them fade into nothingness. I had to return to the forest. I had to find my friends, even if it meant confronting the darkness that had consumed them and nearly consumed me. I packed my things in silence, every movement heavy with dread, but laced with determination. I wasn't sure what I would find, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. Whatever the cost, I had to know.